site. Great. We are recording. Welcome, everyone, to the second CEDS Open Source Update meeting. The CEDS Open Source community was officially launched in November last year. CEDS has always been a community-driven and community-built open standard that anyone can use. The reason behind launching the OSC was to make participation easier and more centralized. And we have had hundreds of various different working groups in the past, but never really a central location where everything going on can be seen in one place. And we are also seeing a large increase in the number of stakeholders implementing the physical data model of CEDS, basically using CEDS as their data system in their state or organization or product. CEDS normally releases a version update yearly, but given the increase in implementations, there is a need to release updates more rapidly now. And the open source community is also a response to that increased need. And through the open source community, the community will be able to approve changes to the standard more rapidly, and will be able to implement those changes as soon as they are ready and not have to wait for the release yearly. The purpose of these update meetings, which is now the second one that we have, is to inform you about anything taking place in the open source community. And the only time something takes place in the open source community is in response to a use case being added. So in this meeting, we're going to go through the use cases. We're going to go through where they are in the pipeline, how you can get involved in any new additions or changes to CEDS through those use cases. We'll look at use cases that are ready for final review, those in progress, and those just submitted. And basically anyone can submit a use case. It's a rather simple process, and I'm going to show you that at the end of the call as well in case you have things you need to change inside of CEDS. First, just a quick reminder that CEDS version 8 will be released near the end of February 2020, so in just a month, almost exactly. The use cases we're going to look at, with the exception of just one of them, are all focused on CEDS version 9. So since version 8 is in the books now, that's done. And so all the use cases, again, with the exception of one, you can view those, you can view version 8 proposed changes at ceds.ed.gov. And so we'll be discussing the version 9 changes here on this call. We presently have 3 repositories on the CEDS GitHub site, and you can see the address there. That's where we take in the use cases. That's where we place any comments, information about what's taking place with those use cases is all there on the GitHub site, github.com/CEDS standards. So we have 3 repositories on GitHub. The first one is the CEDS Collaborative Exchange, and that is for community use for providing code. Nothing presently in there yet, as we've just started kicking everything off, but that would be used for providing code. The 2 we're going to look at are the main development repositories. The integrated data store, that's the CEDS, it's the normalized physical data model, or for those a little less technical, it's all of the CEDS elements in a single database. So every element of CEDS is all P20W in one database. The other repository there is the CEDS elements, and that's the list of all of the P20W elements in CEDS. So all 1,710 and growing number of elements in CEDS, we house in there, and that's where we make changes to the elements. We're going to look at the present use cases for the integrated data store first that exist on the GitHub site. We do not presently have anything that has moved into the ready for review step. We're still working on getting version 8 out the door, and as soon as that's out, we'll be moving things in for version 9. That first use case there, the primary key for every table, that was the one, as I mentioned earlier, that we have one that's actually for version 8. That will actually be part of the version 8 release. So that's one use case that's part of version 8, not version 9. The rest of the use cases we're going to talk about will be for version 9. But the primary key for every table, essentially, I'm going to be sharing back and forth here so you kind of know what I'm talking about as I go through each of these use cases. You should be seeing the CEDS physical database now, which is a list of all of the elements. And so a good example of this would be, essentially if I go here, there's this table is called assessment item, and there's a primary key called assessment item. And so each table would have its own primary key. There are some instances where some tables contain a primary key and a foreign key, and the foreign key actually functions as the primary key, and that is the change we're making. or making that to version 8, and there are individuals out that are implementing, such as Generate, which is using this, and some other stakeholders that are implementing, and they're already aware of this change, and so in their implementations, they've already prepared ahead of time for that. So they've already made that change in anticipation that that would be coming. So no problems generally there in the changes that were being made on that. Let me go ahead and come back. And the second one that's in progress is the rubric criterion adjoined to the competency set. Might be kind of confusing, but essentially, if I go back over to, not to this, share my screen. What we're looking at is inside of CEDS, we have rubrics, a place to store rubrics. So we have the rubric itself, the identifier, the title, the URL, which would be like the website, reference, a description, and then we have the criterion, the category, the title, description, the weight, the position for the rubric itself. What we have presently is that the rubric is tied to the assessment item, but that would require there actually be an assessment. What we want to do is to be able to tie the rubric also to the competency set, and we don't yet have a rubric ID available to tie to that. So that one's being worked on to determine whether the rubric ID goes up inside of here, whether we need a one-to-many or a many-to-many where we have a separate table for rubric criteria and competency set. So that's basically what that use case is the ability to tie the competency set over to the rubric. And coming back into here, those are the two in progress there. Just submitted, a lot of activity taking place in what's just been submitted. I'm going to read through some of these and then kind of give you an idea of what they are. So adding the REF academic term designator ID to the organization calendar session. If we go over to here, basically the academic term designator, fall, winter session, spring, summer, etc. What we want to do is add that to the organization calendar session. Organization calendar session. Inside of here, it's information about the session itself. When did the session begin? When did it end? And then what is the academic term? Is it a spring session? Is it a winter session? Is it a fall session, etc.? So adding that in as a request that's been made by the stakeholders to have that added into there. And then the next one, the field organization region GeoJSON can change over time, so move it to organization detail. In this one, what we're looking at is inside of the organization detail, which is information about the, actually, let me pause back for a second. We have organization. One of the changes that's coming out in version 8 that has already been approved is to actually create an organization detail and take all of this information out of organization because it can change over time. Thus, the organization ID would stay stable, but the name, the organization type, the short name, and the region GeoJSON would change over time. And so that moves all of these elements into an organization detail. These have already been moved in, these first three, but getting that region GeoJSON element also into the organization detail table is the change that would be made there as well. And going back up to here, the post-secondary exit or withdrawal type, that is a product of the student's post-secondary institution enrollment, not a post-secondary program enrollment. So this is the change that they're wanting to make. It's basically the exit or withdrawal type for post-secondary inside the IDS is in the wrong location. And so if we take a look inside of CEDS, inside of the data store, and we go take a look down at post-secondary specifically, if we look at the program, we can see that there is a reference to the exit or withdrawal type. Programs themselves don't exit, and so this is about the organization. So it's the name of the program, what kind of program it is, but it doesn't actually exit. And so this is actually located in the wrong location and belongs instead over down here in PS student enrollment. And so this will be moved out of here and replaced inside of the PS student enrollment. That's the proposed change that is inside the use case for that one. And then This one, date, is a reserved word in SQL and should not be used for field names. Won't have to go point that anywhere, but we actually have 3 locations that have been identified in the use case where the word date is actually the column name, and that's not something we want to do. Our Oracle friends who are working on a CEDS, or states who use Oracle, I should say, working on a CEDS integrated data store that's an Oracle version, have mentioned this one that it's not working because of that word date, and so we're going to actually contextualize those columns is what we're looking at doing for that. And then finally, the last one for the IDS that was just submitted is managing when option set values are deprecated or they go away and reference tables. So we actually have a ticket from the forum, from NCS forum, to do some changes to exit codes, and we'll go over that ticket in a little bit, but one of the changes they're proposing actually deprecates one of the elements. And so historically, that element would still need to be available for longitudinal purposes, but would need to be end dated. And so what we're looking at there is to, if we take a look at this exit or withdrawal type, which is what they're considering removing, the one they're considering actually removing is exited because it's rather generic. Why did you exit? Because I exited. That doesn't make a lot of sense. And we already have other, so if you don't know the why they exited, you could use other, and so exited just kind of is redundant. And so adding a record start and end date for this so that you could actually end date when this is no longer a valid code. And so this code ceased to be valid at version 9, which occurred February whatever of 2021. So that could be an end date for when exited no longer a valid code. And that way, systems looking at that or individuals looking at that would know this code's valid from here to here, but it's no longer valid to be used anytime past that record end date that's been placed in there. So those are the IDS ones. Let me go back up here, stop sharing there. And we're going to move out of those. Since those are just submitted, we're not really ready to do some discussions around those, although if you have any opinions, you can definitely go to the GitHub site. Let me show you that real quick and show you where you can actually respond to some of these items. That's the wrong one. That's the right one. So if you go to github.com, CEDS standards, you'll see the 3 repositories that are located here. We have the CEDS Collaborative Exchange, the CEDS IDS, and the CEDS Elements. If we go into the IDS and we take a look at the issues, you're going to see the ones I just discussed. Add the ref academic term designated organization or calendar session, the rubric criterion join, the primary key. All of these are listed in here. And at any point, if you have changes you need done to the IDS, you can always add a new issue. It does require getting an account on GitHub. The account is free. There are pay-for accounts on GitHub, but you do not need a paid-for account on GitHub to do any of the things you would do inside of CEDS to follow or track issues or to add issues or to comment on issues. So you can just add new issue there. And let's move that off there. What we have inside of here, though, so let's say you have some opinions about moving the post-secondary exit or withdrawal type out of the program, you can come in and you can also leave a comment. So any thoughts you have about ways to do certain things that have been suggested, you can comment on those, and then we keep track of all the different comments that come in related to the particular issue at hand. So I'm going to stop sharing and head over here to take a look at some of the CEDS elements. Now these are in progress and we are ready to begin having some discussions around these. And so what we're going to do on this call, I'm going to get any immediate reactions. When I get to that point, you can feel free to unmute yourself and give those, or you can also just enter any kind of immediate reactions in the chat. But otherwise, if you are interested in participating, there are 5 different CEDS element use cases that I'm going to go over. And for each one of those, we want to have a meeting with stakeholders to kind of get the right path forward, moving forward for those particular elements. So if you are interested at all in participating in any of these, just email me, DwayneBrown@aemcorp.com. Let me know what it is that you want to discuss, and then we'll set up a time that will work with us. So we'll have the initial stakeholder who presented the use case, and then also have any other stakeholders that want to discuss that. So the first that we're looking at is the disaggregate of the homeless primary nighttime resident option of shelters to separate out transitional housing. So what does this mean? Basically, if I come into here and we go into CEDS and we take a look at the K-12 student and homeless and the homeless primary nighttime residents. The present definitions, this is the present definition, but the present option sets, we have shelters, we have doubled up, we have unsheltered, and we have hotels, motels. These match what you would find for EDFACS for reporting homeless information on primary nighttime residents. The issue that comes up is that there is a state that is actually tracking shelters separately. So they have the options that have doubled up, unsheltered, and hotels, motels. But for shelters, they have shelters, transitional housing, and awaiting foster care as three separate option sets. So they essentially have 6 option sets, and they need to track shelters and transitional housing separately, as well as awaiting foster care. And there are differences even in some legislation, as some of the research we've done, that would separate transitional housing and shelters out as separate elements. And then obviously awaiting foster care would be different than a student who's living in a shelter. And so they keep track of those 3 elements separately. So what we need to do is find a way to adjust CEDS to be able, if we're going to adjust CEDS for that purpose, to be able to track that information separately. So one thought was that we would actually close out of this. One thought was that we would just expand this, take shelters, transitional housing, and awaiting foster care, and make them their own elements inside of primary nighttime residents. So you have shelters, transitional housing, and awaiting foster care as their own separate option sets. And we leave doubled up unsheltered hotel motels alone, which could work. And so anyone utilizing CEDS who did not have these, if we take those out, you would see that the option sets are still the same: shelters, doubled up, unsheltered hotel motels, which could work. The problem comes in that shelters itself is no longer defined as including transitional housing or awaiting foster care. It would just be shelters. And so if somebody was to do some research or want to look into the system to see what kind of, if you did some research on your own system and you said, okay, well, how many students are homeless and what are the types of residences that they have? Okay, well, there's students in shelters, but there are no students in transitional housing or awaiting foster care, even though they may be in transitional housing awaiting foster care under this option set. So we're just looking for the best way in CEDS to make the changes to CEDS to be able to accommodate those who collect this more granularly and those who also collect it just the way EDFACS has it for reporting. So given that, I'm going to take some time here. If you have any immediate reactions to thoughts around that, you can feel free to unmute yourself and we can have some small, short discussions around that, or feel free to put information in the chat. You might not be the right person on the call to discuss this. You may have some homeless experts in your state that could help us take a look at that, or your state may actually have some different granularity beyond what we've presented there and what's in the use case. So in all instances, though, if you'd like to be part of the conversation for how we resolve this issue, then you would go ahead and email me, Dwayne Brown again at amcorp.com, and we can set up time to actually go over this issue. So we're going to definitely go over it with the stakeholder presented it, and then would also like to include some other stakeholders who may have some opinions about how we're going to make the change to CEDS to get that to work. So any thoughts immediately in the chat, or by just unmuting? I'll give you like a second or two to look at that before we transition to the next use case. All right, no immediate reactions to that, but please feel free to email me if you want to be part of that conversation. The next one that we're looking at is adding an organization type. I think I have a hand raised. Do I have to unmute that? I think you can unmute yourself, but Tricia, you might want to take a look at that.
Okay.
Hand raised there if you can unmute. I think it's Jim Goodell.
Thank you. It looks like others, TQ and Fred, wanted to say something, but they can't unmute.
Good deal. Thank you for letting us know
Yeah.
that. We have the ability to unmute TQ White, and I'm not sure, is it Fred Edora? Or Fred someone else?
Oh, Fred said he doesn't have anything to say. We're just backing up TQ that he can't unmute.
Got it.
So I think it's just TQ.
Christian, do you have the ability to unmute?
You should be unmuted now.
There we go. Awesome.
I feel so much better. My red thing went away.
Yay, no more red thing. What do you got,
No
TQ?
more red thing. I don't know whether I'd engage in email, but I want to say that it seems to me that it's crucial that you do not repurpose the property named shelter to have a different meaning. I think that it's the correct solution is to add a property named perhaps shelter only or something like that, which means only shelter, not the three things. If you repurpose the word shelter to mean something different, then every single person who has used the word shelter in the past now has incorrect data, which is to say their use of the code shelter tomorrow means the person was for sure in the shelter when in fact when they put it in, when they entered it, they thought it was shelter transitional or whatever. That's my observation.
That's a very good observation. I like it.
Thank you.
Adding potentially an additional element or additional option instead of shelter only, which would then, I kind of like this. Shelter only, transitional housing only, or awaiting foster care only, and then shelters remains.
To refer to all three people who used it in the past.
As a combination. Yeah, very good. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, TQ.
You can mute me now. I'm done.
Well, you should be able to mute yourself theoretically, but who knows?
It wouldn't.
Then you come back off. It wouldn't let you. All right. Sounds good. Anyone else? If anybody sees hands raised, because I can't see hands raised or whatever might be occurring. We've got a Doris Mann with a hand raised.
I only see Jim Goodell's hand raised. Let me see. Doris Mann is not connected to audio.
That would make it harder. It's probably a call-in user. Well, no, because Well, if you're a call-in user and it's not connected to the audio, we won't be able to unmute you because we wouldn't be able to guess which call-in user it is. But go ahead and type it into the thought you have there, and then we can discuss that. Because it'd be hard to identify which call-in user. All right. While she's typing
and I'm sorry. If I could say, if you're sending a chat, can you send it to all participants? Because I'm not seeing them if you're sending them just to attendees. So if all participants would be perfect.
Yes, because if it goes to all attendees, we are not attendees. We will not be able to see the chat. because it goes only to the attendees and not to us. All right, I'm going to move into this one, and then we'll see if something comes up in the chat. Oh, there we go. Have you dealt with this before, making an item more granular, or how have you dealt with this before, making an item more granular? That I may want to refer to Jim Goodell on, trying to think if we have another element that we've had to break out. We are looking at the military elements as well. Some of those we may have to make more granular in nature, but that's a good thought, is to go back through some of the process in the past for when the element has to become, ideally CEDS is granular to begin with, but sometimes it's not.
So I think in the past we've had different situations. I can think of one, I think, where we created a brand new element because it was different enough, and there were some legacy needs to keep the old data. And I think I can think of an example where it was similar to the solution that TQ suggested, where the new element is, the new option is added using a different, the breakout of the options are using different names than the original.
Yeah, perfect, thanks. All right, so again, feel free chat with the all attendees or panelists if you have any other thoughts about that one. The next one, again, also or email me if you want to be involved in how we ultimately resolve this. The next one is add organization and program type to support early and middle college. So I'm going to take you over to the GitHub site where there's a little bit more. Keep going to the wrong one. There we go. A little bit more from a reference here on this one. So we come back into CEDS standards. We go down to elements where these use cases are listed. Issues. And organization in early middle college. We've done some digging in this, and there's some investigative work. It seems pretty straightforward to me, but that's why we're on this call and why we're going to have an additional call, just to make sure. And that is, there's some links here related to some various different things related to early middle college. There's also a link up here related to early middle college. It would seem, though, that the primary difference between, just a lot of students are enrolled in dual enrollment, which means they're taking college classes while they're in high school and they're getting college credit for it. What the stakeholder needs, though, is to separate these three out and track them differently. So in a dual enrollment situation, the student is in high school and they're taking college classes either at the high school, or they're taking them online, or they're taking them at the college, but ultimately they're still enrolled in that particular high school. And they'll graduate from that high school with college credit from some other entity. And that's what dual enrollment essentially is, or dual credit. In middle college, the student is actually enrolled in a separate school that is a middle college, based off of what I'm reading from all of the things that are happening out here. And so the middle college itself is a school. It's on a campus, a college campus, or a university, so it's on that actual campus. And so the student, a traditional student who was in high school that's now going to go into middle college, would actually leave their LEA or school and would enroll in a different LEA or school that is the middle college. And there at that middle college, that's where they will graduate from high school from. And when they graduate from high school, they will also have college credit. Then there's early college, which is the same as middle college in that it's its own separate school on a college campus. The student takes their high school courses there and they take their college courses there, so they're actually enrolled in that school. But when they graduate with their high school diploma from early college, they also will graduate with no less than 2 years of college or an associate's degree at a minimum. It could be more, but they would have 2 years of college and or an associate's degree. So early college is more about the completion rate. Early and middle are about being on campus in a actual school designed for this, and then dual enrollment is in an actual regular traditional high school or even a charter school, but taking college classes additionally. Those are the three that we've come up with so far as the differences are concerned. We obviously have dual enrollment inside of CEDS. What the request is to add some kind of organization type that differentiates a K-12 LEA school, that it's actually a middle college, and then actually that this particular LEA is an early college, or the school. The school's a middle college, the school's an early college, and then also or a program type, because the university itself offers it as a program within the university, that being the middle college and the early college, or whoever is offering it. So the need is to add a program type of middle college and a program type of early college, and I believe it's a school type or an organization type of early college and organization type of middle college. All right, so that's the need. Several states are obviously doing this, and let's see if we have things coming in. And we do have, wow, we got stuff, all kinds of things. So Michigan tracks early and middle colleges together. That is, they consider both early and middle colleges to be the same thing. So that's important to know, especially since Michigan is the one that submitted this, and yet the definitions out there differ slightly from what they're saying. Michigan does not distinguish between middle and early, but does have different types of organization types more related to the function of the organization administration than the studies. I'm reading from the comment section. Does not distinguish between middle and early, but does have different types of organization more related to the function of the organization administration than study. Okay, good to know. So we'll take, Michigan will obviously be part of the conversation since they're the ones that need this specifically. Others out there that are familiar with early and middle college, if you have any comments, feel free to type those in, or raise a hand to get unmuted, or type into the chat to all panelists or all attendees that you would like to say something, because we might miss the hand raise. And then obviously we're going to have a call about this to discuss it in more in depth, and you can email me if you want to be a part of that discussion, or if you know of somebody in your state that would be, an expert to actually have that conversation about the way that early and middle college may be organized in your state. I'm seeing if I have any additional comments here. I'll give it a second or two. All right, anything coming in to host or anywhere else?
No.
All right, I'm going to move on, but feel free to type away if you need to, or like I said, email me. So the next one that we have is the foreign comments on exit or withdrawal type, and we'll go take a look at these. Share. Coming back into the issues. Foreign comments on exit or withdrawal type. So CEDS has an element when a student exits from their enrollment, they're no longer in membership at a particular school, an exit or withdrawal type is applied to that. And you can come to here and you can read through all the different documentation related to it, but breaking it down, what we're looking at is some non-breaking changes and then some breaking changes. The form is basically recommending 7 changes to the CEDS exit or withdrawal. For these 4 codes, all they're really doing is actually changing the definition slightly. So if we come in here, take a look at enrollment and the exit or withdrawal type, and we look at like this one, transferred to a private, non-religiously affiliated school in the same local education agency. Well, the problem they saw with this definition, which I think it improves the context and actually improves the definition. So the student exited from membership in the education institution and transferred to a private, non-religiously affiliated school in the same LEA. I don't think that the intention of this definition was to indicate that the student transferred to a private school that was in the LEA. And so that's what they're stating as well, that the intention is actually probably to say that they transferred to a private school in the geographic boundaries of the same local education agency, so that the private school is not actually a part of the organizational structure of the LEA, but the private school is actually in the LEA's geographic boundaries. And that'd be the same thing as this, to attend a private non-religiously affiliated school in a different LEA in the same state, actually in the geographic boundaries of a different LEA in the same state. So if we look at what they're suggesting here, it's to add the within the geographic boundaries of to both the description and definition of these particular codes. And I think that makes sense, but if anyone out there is using those exit codes to actually indicate a private school that is in that LEA, like a school that's part of that LEA, that would be good to know, because that would actually then be a non-breaking change. But there are other exit codes that actually apply better to that, to like a different school in the same LEA. So that's the change being proposed there. And let me go, yes. And then additionally, they're recommending adding a new code that the student is expected to return to the same school. So that's typically done like at the end of the school year. Student exits, or if they apply an exit code at the end of the school year to say, okay, it's May 23rd or June 2nd or June 15th, the students exited, and we're expecting that they're going to return at the beginning of the same school year. Sometimes that's calculated by states as they take a look at that. Sometimes exit codes aren't applied, but this provides an exit code to indicate that, yeah, this student was in 9th grade and they left, but we're fully expecting to see them again in the fall. So that's applied to that. That's an additional exit code they want to add. The breaking changes would be, there's a code of 01923, and that code itself is died or permanently incapacitated. And the recommended change is to actually take this and turn it into two separate codes. So likely we would deprecate 01923, and then we would add two additional codes. But that's one of the questions, is should we keep the code and change it to the student exited, or should we create two new codes? Given TQ's comment, I lean towards leaving the code alone because it means this, and then actually creating two separate codes that are new, that split them apart. So the student died or the student is permanently incapacitated. And talking about this just makes me sad in general to think about, because this is horrible. But we need the two separate codes specifically related to the cohort graduation rate, because a student who has died is removed from the graduation rate. A student who's permanently incapacitated is included in the graduation rate. So needing to know what actually occurred with the exit would be that one. And then finally, we have the code of 03505. And this one, they're recommending, as I mentioned before, just deprecating that one and removing it. The code of, there's other codes that can be used just the same. We have other, obviously exited, other basically means the same thing. And then we also have not enrolled and eligible to return, which would also probably be similar to exited, but actually taking that particular exit code and deprecating it in CEDS, so it's no longer in use because it's rather generic and means the same thing essentially as other. So those are the comments there. Thoughts on those? Let's see if we have things coming through. TQ White, definitely deprecate. All right. Let's see what we got. Any other comments coming through? There's not distinguished early, middle. Here's one related back to the homeless. I just looked up the Education for Homeless Children Youth Program non-regulatory guidance issued July 27th, 2016. It appears as though awaiting foster care is no longer an option for homeless. So that's a great comment. Definitely something to look into, whether or not that even needs to be included. We'll take a look at that to see if that is a change that actually needs to occur to the homeless residency itself. And this looks like one. Yes, however, we have legacy data that needs to have storage options. I'm assuming that's related to the exit, Doris, changes in the exit code. We would retain any of the older exit codes, and we would add new ones. And so given that from the storage standpoint, we would deprecate the codes, but they would remain inside of the CEDS IDS. So if we were to go, where's my share button? Share. If we were to go back over to here and we were to take a look at these exit or withdrawal type codes, we would actually have a record start and end date and a record start date and a record end date here to indicate that the code itself has exited, ceased to be in existence for version 9 on this date, but it still exists within the database. And so others utilizing, probably the main one being the died or is permanently incapacitated, this code applies backwards to all of the different records it applies to, but then there's a new code of died and new code of permanently incapacitated going forward. And so this would have an end date to it, and then died, permanently incapacitated would have a new date for when they actually started. So the historically, records could still be loaded that apply to that particular code. I think that might answer the question, or is a way that edit could be done. And this is all, again, ideas for how we've gone through these elements, and we're presenting to you thoughts that we have, and we're more than happy to have you disagree with us because I really have no immediate opinions on it, and have good reactions, and email me if you want to be part of the conversation that ultimately decides what we're going to do with it, because you all decide this. Anything else coming through for the hosts? Not seeing it. I'm going to go to the next one, I think. This one, as all things do, seems pretty straightforward, but we'll see what happens when I get your initial reactions. This is to add full-time equivalency as an element to CEDS, specifically around the enrollment of the student. We actually have full-time equivalency in a couple other locations. So if I go over to CEDS and come up here, let's go this way because I like it better to search. If I spelled correctly, you can search through CEDS. We have special education full-time equivalency, and we have staff full-time equivalency. So taking a look at that, we can see calculated ratio of the time students in special education setting, ranging from 0 to 1, so it's a full-time equivalency, and then we have the staff full-time equivalency, the ratio between the hours worked expected in a position and the hours normally expected in a full-time position in the same setting. So it's a full-time equivalency is what we have. What's being recommended is that for a K-12 student, and then also for really any other student, but the particular need is a K-12 student, that for the enrollment, we add an element in here. It could be K-12 student full-time equivalency, could just be full-time equivalency. We haven't really identified what the name should be, but something along those lines. Nebraska has this, and we're aware of another state, I believe, that has that as well, that looks at students across schools. So like a student may be 50% in one school and 50% in another. And so they'd be 0.5 at this school and 0.5 at that one as far as their enrollment is concerned. So it seems pretty straightforward to add that element. Any thoughts about that one? We do have a thought backwards on the awaiting foster care, and that one is that there's really no need to separate out awaiting foster care from sheltered just to deprecate it. That's a very good point. So we would take a look and see if anyone is utilizing that in relation to that element, and if they're not, and it's not even included anymore, we would not pull it out just to be able to deprecate it. That's a very good thought. We also have that Iowa collects FTE as well. Iowa, do you utilize it as a 0 to 1, like a decimal And that same frame of reference is how I guess how I described it, that it's a student could be half at this school and half at that school. Would be good to know. Yes, they do. Okay, great. Great. So that's that one. Any other thoughts? Feel free again to put those in the chat. Otherwise, again, email me. We're going to set up a call around this one to discuss how we're going to add that particular element into CEDS. And then finally, this one's not been fully thought out, so I won't go into great detail. We still have a conversation we're going to have with DataShop, but essentially DataShop, as part of Carnegie Mellon, is looking at some things in relation to how to track hints that are given on assessments. And so what is the hint count that's on an assessment? How did the student respond? Were they given a hint? A lot of other things. And I won't go into full detail on this one. We're going to have a meeting to discuss this a little bit more with a stakeholder. And then we're presenting some things on this as well. But if that's something you're interested in, it's looking at research around assessments, in particular to how like an assessment tutor works with a student. If you have any interest in those elements, there's a few that we're looking at actually adding into the assessment items themselves. So feel free to email me on that one if you have any interest in joining that as well. Nothing there to share on that quite yet because that one just came in a little bit ago. We've already started some analysis on it, but not fully complete. Last thing, we'll go over just the process in case you have any use cases you want to submit. Very simply, the process, first the use case is submitted to CEDS on the GitHub site, which I'd showed you how you go to that use case and you add one. You have to have a login there. It's free. You submit that. We work with the submitter directly to understand the need for the change, and then we work on some design options and development. After that, we push it out to the community to take a look at the proposed changes like we're doing right now, just kind of getting some feedback. The design, the development, and the actual community assessment, that's iterative. We're going to go through that till we have something that we believe the community all agrees to. And then we do some Q&A in the actual database itself to do some testing there. And then finally, it's released as pre-approved. Pre-release is approved, which means that at that point, anyone is safe to go ahead and implement it, knowing that when the yearly version comes out of CEDS, that's going to be in it just like that. Any questions about the process at all? All right, the GitHub site, as I mentioned, is there. It's also a good idea to join the CEDS community. We post events such as the one we're on right now. We advertise working groups there. So these 5 working groups after this, we're going to be advertising those out, the dates and the times for when they'll be taking place. That'll be done over there on the community. The recording of this will be over there on the community as well in this site, and other documentation that we put there that we don't have on the GitHub site will be there as well. So if you're not connected there, that's definitely a good place to be connected and have an account as well, would be on the CEDS.grad360 site. That is all for today. Thank you all for your input, some great conversations and good feedback for these elements. If you want to be part, again, of any of the calls we mentioned for the use cases, email me and we'll get a time set up so we can all meet to discuss. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a great day.